I know Matthew had a question when we joined on how does different companies from their startup phase, right from they going into maturity and maybe getting listed on the street. So how does the FP&A department or the FP&A teams look like? You being advising several companies across different phases of their growth, it'll be very interesting to understand how does different companies have the FP&A department and how it evolves from like a one person team, a CFO managing the budget, to like having a team of like 10, 20, 50 people
Sure.
with big companies.
Sure. So some of you who are familiar with Asif and I and follow what we do on LinkedIn, some of you may have seen a couple of weeks ago, I had made a post about the 4 different phases of what I call FP&A maturity. This is from my experience. This isn't from another organization, and this is exactly what I had shared. I'd say that there are generally 4 levels within FP&A evolution and maturity. At level 1, I call it immature and fractured. At level 2, I call it immature and connected. At level 3, I call it mature and connected. And at level 4, I call it mature and integrated. Now, I give you a rundown in terms of company size, number of employees, what type of platforms you're likely to see. Recognize that this is not exactly the way you're going to see it at every company around the planet. These are just some general standards and trends that I see in the companies that I work with and come across. So for a level 1, for a company that is either just starting out or is a small private business or a family-owned business, let's assume that this is a company doing between $0 and $25 million worth of revenue. Not a huge business. I'm also identifying that the size of the finance team is 1 to 2 FP&A professionals. Now, if you go into a company and you say, how many FP&A people do you have here? You might have a head of finance or a business owner says, we don't have any FP&A professionals. And you say, well, do you have anybody who's doing forecasting, bookkeeping, analysis, relationships with the bank? And they say, well, of course we have that. And I say, well, that's FP&A. And they say, I've never even heard that term before. So you may have small companies. In fact, I was on a call with somebody yesterday and I was talking about FP&A and they said, well, stop. What is FP&A? And this is somebody who's running a $20 million business. So do recognize at the small end of the spectrum, oftentimes you have people who are taking on accounting and financial responsibilities, but they don't see themselves as true FP&A. And that's why I call this immature. You may see a CFO. Oftentimes you don't even see that. You may see a controller or a head of finance, but there often is not a CFO. Most of the work that is being done is in a traditional bookkeeping accounting software like a QuickBooks or a Xero or a Sage. And then any kind of analysis or forecast is likely being done in Excel or Google Sheets. Very rarely do I see anything more robust than this. Moving to a level 2 is when a company says, look, we actually do need to get more from our finance function because now we're a $25 to $100 million company. You start to see more full-time employees, so usually between 1 and 4, give or take. You do see a budgeting process and a forecasting process that's likely to involve not just the heads of finance, but leadership of other groups. So you will see the finance team. You will see the sales team. You may see the marketing team. You may see human resources based upon future hiring that they anticipate seeing. So while coordinated and led by the finance team, you're going to see involvement from other people. In terms of the systems that you're likely to see, you may still see reliance upon Excel and Google Sheets. You may still see systems in QuickBooks, Xero, and Sage, but now you're starting to see exploration into more robust ERP systems, such as NetSuite, owned by Oracle, as well as Intact. You may see a little bit of movement over to some data visualization and business modeling through Tableau or Power BI. So you start to see connections between the company or amongst people within the company, as well as connections to other pieces of software. not just basic accounting to basic spreadsheet software. You're going to see more robust accounting to spreadsheet software, but also possibly to inventory management, to HR, to payroll, to insurance, all these connections starting to take place. Thereafter, this is where we start to see the greatest amount of transition, benefit, but also pain going from level 2 to level 3. 100 million to 500 million, I start to call this mature, because in these types of organizations, if I were to go into Asif's company and say, Asif, you're doing $250 million, can you explain your FP&A function? And he would say, we have a developed FP&A function, albeit it's a little bit fractured. We're still developing, we're still hiring, we're still filling roles and responsibilities. Oh, at the same time, we're now forecasting on a monthly basis. We have financial business partners around the company who are involved in forecasting and budgeting. And by the way, we've also migrated away from QuickBooks or Sage or Xero to NetSuite or Workday or something else that's far more connected in its native state than an API connecting here and an API connecting here and an export going there and an import coming from here. So you start to see a lot more connectivity among people and a lot more connectivity among systems. And then finally, at a level 4, I say this is at your $500 million and above. Although I've seen companies well below that are at a level 4. I've also seen companies that are multi-billion dollars that would say they're a level 2. But let's say level 4 is mature, meaning that there's an established FP&A function as well as integrated. When you take a look at the budgeting process and the forecasting process, this is rolling and ongoing. I often share there was a very large telecommunications company in Canada I worked with a number of years ago. They are updating their consolidated plan every single week. They are able to roll this on an ongoing basis. Other companies saying we're not updating this every week. We're going to update it once a month, but they can do that in a day or a number of days instead of having it be weeks upon weeks of effort. In terms of where we see this going in technology, movement over to the SAPs, all over to Oracle, still over on Workday, but then integration again with some EPMs, enterprise performance management platforms like Adaptive, owned by Workday, Planful, Vena Solutions, Anaplan, and then still using the data visualization and analytics power of Tableau and Power BI. So again, 4 different stages, 4 unique purposes and focuses for these different companies of these different sizes. What I would challenge all of you on this call to understand is companies need to ask themselves, what is the ROI or the return on investment of moving from a level 1 to a level 2? Why would we choose to go to a level 2? Why do we need it right now versus just staying at a level 1? And I just mentioned a few minutes ago that you have some huge companies that say, look, we don't actually see the value of moving up the maturity curve because there isn't the return of doing so. Does that make sense, Asif?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now that I look at this slide, like I started my career in so now I can relate to it. I started my career with a level 4 company, like which was very matured. So having systems, processes already documented, all well-oiled, very limited intervention in terms of reporting, where you just needed to like download the reports at a press of a button. So that was with Citi and Pfizer. And then I moved to a level 2 organization where we were just building, like I was the first person in the FP&A team and we were building the FP&A department, and there was absolute chaos, like you mentioned. Like for the first few months, we actually didn't even work on the FP&A. I was actually working on accounting side. So I can absolutely relate to this. And right now I am probably in an organization like that. Right now I'm working with an organization which is in level 3, trying to get into level 4. So I did not notice this when I was in those roles, but now when I look backwards, I can absolutely relate to this slide.
Absolutely. And what's really interesting about being in FP&A right now and over the last few years is no company's perfect. You take a look out there at some of the large corporations that you interact with as a consumer, and you say, oh, well, this company has to have it figured out. And I can tell you from having worked with many of them, lifting up the hood and taking a look inside, they don't. Everyone is figuring it out because there are new technologies and new capabilities that are coming out every single week that have never existed before in the history of time and in the history of commerce. And so these are all companies that are figuring out where they want to go next and what return they're going to get out of investment in their people and investment in their structure. But as Asif has mentioned, when you take a look at FP&A in all these different phases, you get to see more focus on accounting here, more focus on reporting here, more focused on data here, more focused on decision making here. It's really an interesting time to be in this profession. And I would just highlight, as you can see on the very bottom, this is from a presentation that I had given with Tom Kirby, who is a close friend and colleague of mine from Prep DD. He has come out with and built a piece of software that helps create connected financial and accounting planning. Because as you can see here, a lot of this is about connection and integration across the business rather than serving within a vacuum of the finance and accounting functions.